Hi guys, so tonight we're stepping into a world where corn does not yet look like corn, where the crop that will one day fill American fields begins as a shy little grass in the warm hills of ancient Mexico. You can almost hear the night insects singing over stone terraces, smell damp earth after rain, and feel the soft grit of soil under your bare feet. Strange, isn't it, that something so ordinary today, a yellow ear in a grocery bin or a spoonful of cereal, once began as a botanical mystery with tiny seeds and a stubborn attitude. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from, plus your local time, because somewhere out there, someone is drifting off beside a window while someone else is awake with tea. Now, dim the lights. You walk into the deep green hush of ancient Mesoamerica, where the air is warm enough to hold the smell of leaves long after sunset. Around you rise slopes of scrub, forest, and open patches where people have learned to watch plants with a patience that feels almost impossible now. There are no endless golden fields yet, no barns painted red, no tractors humming through Iowa mornings. There is only a wild grass called teosinte, thin and branching, with seed cases so hard they seem designed to annoy anyone hoping for dinner. You bend close to it. The plant brushes your fingers with narrow leaves, smooth on one side, sharp at the edge. Its seeds do not sit in neat rows. They hide inside tough little shells, each one protected like a tiny secret. You might wonder who looked at this plant and thought, yes, this will become supper. Humanity has always had a talent for optimism, and sometimes for making work for itself. The people here do not see the world as a grocery shelf. They know that food is a relationship. You listen as someone cracks dry seed cases with a stone. Tap, tap, tap. The sound is small, repetitive, and patient. Nearby, smoke curls from a cooking fire. It carries the scent of roasted squash, wood ash, and something grassy and faintly sweet. A child laughs. A dog noses the edge of a basket. The evening feels ordinary, which is often how enormous changes begin. The mainstream fact at the heart of this beginning is simple but astonishing. Corn, or maize, was domesticated from teosinte in Mesoamerica thousands of years ago, especially in what is now southern Mexico. That means corn did not appear fully formed, smiling in golden kernels like it was posing for a seed catalogue. People shaped it, hand-selected it, season by season, family by family. They saved seeds from plants that seemed a little more useful, a little softer, a little fuller, a little less determined to defend themselves from being eaten. You stand beside one of those early plots and see how small the experiment is. The first cultivated plants may look unimpressive to modern eyes. Their ears are short, almost toy-like, with only a few kernels. Yet, to the people tending them, each improvement matters. A slightly larger seed head means more food. A less brittle stem means easier harvest. A softer casing means less labour at the grinding stone. Progress comes slowly, not as a trumpet blast, but as a quiet nod from one growing season to the next. The soil is warm beneath your heels. You hear the scrape of stone tools, the murmur of voices, the creak of woven baskets. No one here is saying, "Let us build a continent." No one is imagining ships from across the ocean, plantation kitchens, prairie homesteads, or railroad grain elevators. They are thinking about rain. They are thinking about hunger. They are thinking about whether the seeds saved from the best plants will behave kindly when pressed into the ground again. And here, in the dark, breathing landscape, you begin to understand domestication as a kind of conversation. The plant changes because people choose it. People change because the plant rewards them. A little more food can mean a little more time. A little more time can mean more weaving, more storytelling, more trade, more ceremony, more children surviving lean months. The plant is not merely eaten, it reorganizes the rhythm of life. Historians still argue whether early farmers first valued teosinte mostly for its grain, for its sugary stalks, or for some combination of food, drink, and ritual use. That uncertainty matters because it reminds you not to picture ancient people as simple figures in a dusty textbook. They experimented, they tasted, they argued, probably with the same quiet confidence as anyone today insisting their recipe is the correct one. Maybe one person liked chewing the sweet stems, maybe another cared about the hard seeds, maybe someone found that the plant had a spirit worth honouring. The past rarely hands you one clean answer. It prefers to rustle. As you move through the settlement, you notice how maize enters daily life not alone, but with companions. Squash spreads its broad leaves across the ground, helping shade the soil. Beans climb where they can, curling upward with delicate persistence. Chilies add bite, avocados, amaranth, and other foods join the table in different regions and seasons. Corn is not yet the single giant of later centuries. It is part of a living pattern, a garden of negotiations between people, plants, insects, weather, and appetite. The atmosphere is soft but not easy. Nights can be cold in the highlands. Rains can fail. Birds steal seeds. Rodents discover storage baskets with the enthusiasm of tiny criminals. A storm can flatten hopes in an afternoon. Still, maize becomes more reliable with each generation of selection. Its kernels cling to the cob instead of scattering naturally. This is terrible for the plant in the wild, because it now needs human hands to spread it. But it is wonderful for people. The cob becomes a handle of abundance, a tidy little package of calories waiting to be dried, stored, ground, boiled, roasted, or carried. There is something almost tender about that dependency. Corn becomes less wild, and in return, humans become more bound to it. You can feel the beginning of that bond when you lift an early ear in your palm. It is light, uneven, and precious. The kernels are not yet the plump bright beads you know. They may be dark, pale, reddish, or mottled, because maize has always loved variety. The modern idea that corn should be only yellow is a very late bit of visual bossiness. Ancient maize is more like a basket of small stones gathered from a riverbed, each colour holding its own quiet mood. Here comes a quirky little tidbit, the kind that makes the past feel wonderfully strange. Teosinte looks so unlike modern corn that for a long time, some researchers doubted it could really be corn's ancestor. Imagine meeting a wolf and being told it's related to a tiny lapdog in a sweater. Technically true, emotionally confusing. The transformation from teosinte to maize is so dramatic that it feels like plant alchemy. But it happened through ordinary human attention repeated across countless seasons. You follow the smell of food toward a shelter, where kernels are being softened and prepared. Later Mesoamerican peoples will develop nixtamalization, a process of treating maize with an alkaline substance such as lime or ash. This will make nutrients more available and turn maize into dough suitable for tortillas and tamales. In this earliest world, practices vary and develop over time, but the essential lesson is already forming. Corn is not just grown, it is processed with knowledge. Without the right preparation, a crop can fill the stomach and still fail the body. With skill, it becomes nourishment, culture, and comfort. You hear grinding stones now, a low rasping rhythm. Stone against stone, grain becoming meal. The sound is humble, almost sleepy, but it is the sound of civilization thickening. Not civilization as marble columns and official portraits. Thank goodness. Those arrive later and usually demand very serious facial expressions. This is civilization as breakfast, civilization as stored seed, civilization as the ability to feed a guest, survive a dry spell, and teach a child where to plant when the moon and clouds seem right. The earliest farmers do not separate food from story. Plants carry meaning because survival carries meaning. Maize will become sacred in many Mesoamerican traditions. In later Maya stories, Humans are even fashioned from maize dough, which is frankly one of the more flattering origin stories. Being made from corn dough sounds warm, practical, and likely to pair well with beans. But beneath the gentle humour sits a deep truth. When a crop feeds people for generations, it becomes part of how they imagine the body itself. You walk farther through the dusk, the horizon glows violet, insects thrum from the grasses, smoke clings to your hair, a basket presses a woven pattern into your forearm when you lift it. Inside are seeds selected for planting, not eating. That choice is an act of faith. Every seed saved is a meal refused today so that tomorrow may exist. It is hard to think of a more serious bargain. Over centuries, maize spreads through valleys, across mountains, and into new ecological zones. It adapts because people carry it, test it, and rename it. Some varieties suit wet lowlands, others endure drier places, some mature quickly, some grow tall, some produce kernels suited for flour, others for popping, roasting, or brewing. Corn becomes not one thing, but many. It is a library written in seed, and every farmer keeps a few pages. You stand in that library without shelves. It surrounds you as living leaves. The stalks whisper in the night air, not yet towering over a continent, but already gathering power. Their roots hold the soil. Their pollen will drift like yellow dust. Their ears will become memory wrapped in husk. The future of America is nowhere in sight, and yet its foundation is being quietly assembled by people who will never hear that name. That's the strange comfort of this beginning. History does not always start with kings, wars, or grand speeches echoing through stone halls. Sometimes it starts with a person noticing that one grass plant has better seeds than another. Sometimes it starts with a hand reaching down into warm earth. Sometimes it starts with dinner. You kneel as the last light fades. The ground smells mineral and alive. Somewhere nearby, maize kernels dry in the smoky air, faintly sweet, faintly dusty. You feel how small the first steps are, and how immense their consequences will become. A crop is being taught to feed people, and people are being taught to follow the crop. In this quiet exchange, the long history of corn begins, not with thunder, but with a seed saved carefully in the dark. You walk north with a small pouch of seed tied close to the body. Because food on the move is never just food. It is memory, insurance, promise, and a little bit of stubborn hope. The path is not a road in the modern sense. It is a worn understanding between villages, rivers, ridges, and resting places. Your feet press into dust warmed by the sun. Dry grass whispers at your ankles. Somewhere ahead, a raven makes a rough questioning call, as if it too would like to know why humans are always carrying things from one place to another. The maize in your pouch is not exactly like the maize grown in the humid lowlands or mountain basins far to the south. It has travelled through hands and climates, shaped by each new household that plants it. Some ears mature faster, some withstand cooler nights, some survive in places where rain behaves like an unreliable neighbour, smiling one month and vanishing the next. Corn is becoming a traveller, and you feel the quiet importance of that transformation with every step. Across the Americas, indigenous farmers do not simply receive maize as though it were a finished invention, they adapt it. That is the mainstream historical fact at the centre of this landscape. Corn spread widely through indigenous networks, reaching the American Southwest, the eastern woodlands, the Great Plains, the Caribbean, and South America in many different forms. It moved through trade, migration, exchange, marriage ties, diplomacy, curiosity, and necessity. No single empire pushed it everywhere. No single farmer woke up and decided to become the manager of continental agriculture, which is probably for the best. The crop moved because people moved, talked, tasted, experimented, and remembered. You enter a dry village set near a wash where water runs only when the season permits. The air smells of dust, smoke, and crushed sage. Corn grows in small fields placed with care, often near floodplains or places where runoff can be guided. You hear digging sticks striking earth with a hollow thud. The soil is not generous unless treated with respect. Plant too shallow, and the seed dries. Plant too deep, and it may never rise. You kneel and push your fingers into the ground. It is warm at the surface, cooler below, faintly damp where hope lives. Here, farming is a conversation with scarcity. People plant maize in widely spaced hills to conserve moisture. They choose varieties that can race through a short growing season or endure long dry stretches. Some farmers plant deep, trusting hidden moisture under the desert crust. You can feel the patience in that gesture. There is no room for lazy optimism. Corn may be sacred, useful, beautiful, and delicious. But it still requires water, and water does not care how poetic you are. The soundscape changes as you move eastward into greener country. Cicadas pulse from trees, leaves click in soft wind. Streams chatter over stones, the smell of damp bark, clay. And cooking fires thickens the air. In many communities, maize grows with beans and squash in fields that appear less rigid than later European farms, but are no less intelligent. Beans climb the corn stalks. Squash leaves spread wide, cooling the soil and discouraging weeds. The three crops create a practical partnership, and also a cultural one. You can almost hear the plants gossiping among themselves. Corn stands tall and dramatic. Beans do the elegant climbing. Squash sprawls like it owns the place. Honestly, every household has someone like squash. You watch people tend the fields with tools of wood, bone, shell, and stone. Children scare birds away. Elders inspect leaves for signs of trouble. Women in many societies play central roles in planting, processing, storing, and distributing maize, though roles vary widely from place to place. Food work is knowledge work. It includes weather memory, soil judgment, seed selection, cooking skill, storage strategy, and ritual timing. A full granary is not an accident. It is community achievement stacked basket by basket. Corn becomes a calendar you can eat. Its growth marks the turning year. Planting, sprouting, tasseling, roasting, drying, grinding, and storing each carry their own mood. Green corn festivals and harvest ceremonies in various indigenous traditions express gratitude, renewal, and social order. You stand at the edge of a gathering where the air is sweet with roasting ears. Husks blacken over coals. Kernels hiss softly as moisture escapes. Someone laughs quietly. Someone sings in a rhythm that seems to rise from the earth itself. You take a roasted ear in your hands. The husk is hot and slightly rough. Steam lifts with a grassy sweetness. The kernels are chewy, not the sugary softness of many modern varieties, but something deeper and earthier. They taste of smoke, rain, labour, and waiting. Around you, food is not separated from obligation. To eat is to belong. To share is to keep relationships alive. To waste is rude not just to people, but to the fragile agreement that makes survival possible. Scholars still debate how quickly maize became a staple in different regions, because signs of corn in ancient diets do not appear everywhere at the same pace. In some places, it may have remained a supplement for centuries. In others, it grew central more rapidly. Archaeologists study charred kernels, pollen, grinding stones, storage pits, and even chemical traces in human bones, trying to understand how much maize people actually ate. The evidence is patient but not chatty. It gives hints, then lets experts argue politely for generations, which is one of academia's favourite hobbies. As you travel through river valleys and woodland settlements, maize takes on new shapes in daily life. It is boiled into stews, parched for travel, ground into meal, shaped into cakes, mixed with beans, stored in pits, hung in braids, sealed in baskets, and protected from damp and pests. You pass storage structures raised from the ground, their contents more valuable than decoration or display. A stored harvest means winter meals. It means trade goods. It means resilience when hunting is poor or wild plants are scarce. It means a family can breathe a little more easily when frost silvering the ground announces that easy food has gone to sleep. In the southeast, larger communities use maize as one part of complex agricultural and ceremonial life. In the Mississippi Valley, towns rise near river systems where fertile floodplains support dense populations. You see mounds in the distance, shaped by organized labor and shared purpose. Smoke hangs over plazas, dogs bark, shell ornaments catch the light, cornfields help feed towns where craft, politics, religion, trade, and hierarchy grow more elaborate. Maize does not create these societies alone, because history is rarely that tidy, but it supports the calories that make larger settlements possible. Here is a quirky tidbit to tuck under the blanket of your mind. Some ancient varieties of corn were popcorn types, and popped maize has deep roots in the Americas. Imagine a quiet night, a hot vessel, and kernels suddenly leaping like startled insects. It is oddly comforting to know that people long ago may have enjoyed the same small drama that still makes modern humans stand too close to the microwave, pretending we can judge the perfect moment by sound alone. You continue toward the Great Plains, where corn lives differently. The wind is broader here. It moves over grass with a soft oceanic roar. You smell sun-dried stems, animal hide, and smoke from a low fire. Some communities combine farming with hunting, gathering, and trade. In places along rivers, maize fields grow near villages, while seasonal movement connects people to bison, wild plants, and neighbouring groups. The crop is important, but it does not erase older ways of living. It joins them, sometimes uneasily, sometimes beautifully. Corn also becomes diplomacy. A basket of seed can carry trust. A meal can seal a relationship. A variety suited to one valley may become a treasure in another. You watch traders arrive with shells, stone, feathers, pigments, woven goods, stories, and seed. They bring news of weather, conflict, ceremony, marriage, and opportunity. Trade is not merely economic, it is social breath. Through it, maize moves not as a lonely object but as part of a bundle of meanings. At night, you rest near a hearth, the fire snaps softly, cornmeal thickens in a pot, releasing a warm, toasted smell. The ground beneath your blanket is firm, and coolness creeps up through woven fibre into your shoulders. Above you, stars appear with almost rude abundance. Someone nearby tells a story in a low voice. You do not catch every word, but you understand the cadence. It is the sound of people placing themselves inside a living world. Maize has become food, but also measure. It measures seasons, generosity, skill, patience, and belonging. It teaches that survival is collective. A seed saved by one hand may feed another. A field planted by many may carry a village through hunger. A ceremony of thanks may remind everyone that abundance is never guaranteed, even when the harvest looks golden and full. You rise in the grey light, dew beads on leaves. The air tastes cool and faintly smoky. A woman lifts a basket of dried ears, and the kernels knock softly against one another, a small wooden music. This is not yet the cornfield of American myth, with its straight rows fading toward a machine-cut horizon. It is older, more varied, more intimate. It is maize braided into language, law, meals, jokes, prayers, trade routes, and sleep. You carry one seed in your palm. It is hard, smooth, and almost weightless. Still, inside that smallness rests a whole geography of human care. Every field you pass has its own weather memory. Every variety carries decisions made by people whose names may be gone, though their work remains alive each time a stalk rises from earth. The continent is not waiting empty. It is already planted with knowledge. You stand at the edge of a cold Atlantic shore where the wind tastes of salt and iron, and the trees seem to lean inward as if studying the strangers who have arrived with heavy boots, damp wool, and very confident opinions about survival. The wooden ship behind you creaks in the tide. Ropes groan. Gulls cry with the rude energy of creatures that have never once worried about planting season. The air smells of wet timber, smoke, seaweed, and sickness. A sour human closeness that clings to packed cabins and tired bodies. The land does not feel empty. It is full of paths, fields, fishing places, burial grounds, hunting territories, and memory. It is full of people who know when the herring run, where the soil warms first, which marsh plants can be eaten, and how to read a sky that is quietly deciding whether to punish everyone. The newcomers may not understand this at first because people arriving scared and hungry often mistake unfamiliar order for disorder. That is a very old human mistake, and not one of our most charming. You walk into a small English settlement where hunger sits in every corner like an unpaid debt. Houses are rough, roofs leak, and smoke crawls low inside rooms because chimneys are not always in the mood to cooperate. The ground is muddy underfoot. Your fingers ache from cold when you touch a wooden bowl. Inside it is a thin meal made from grain that is running out. Men argue softly. Children cough. Someone sharpens a tool with slow, exhausted strokes. The sound is steady, but it doesn't sound hopeful. Then maize appears, not as a miracle glowing in golden light, but as something practical, local, and absolutely necessary. The mainstream fact is clear. European colonists in North America quickly learned that indigenous corn could help keep settlements alive, especially when imported food failed. Familiar European crops struggled, and hunger grew dangerous. In Virginia, in New England, and in other colonial regions, maize became one of the first foods that taught newcomers a humbling lesson. The land had rules already, and survival meant learning them from people who had been living by them for generations. You see corn stored in baskets and pits, dried hard enough to last, carried in sacks, traded, gifted, demanded, stolen, and worried over. It is not merely a crop, it is leverage, it is diplomacy. It is also, when things turn bitter, a target. In the early English colonies, relations with indigenous communities range from wary cooperation to open violence, and corn stands in the middle of it all. A basket of maize can mean welcome. A field destroyed can mean war. A winter storehouse can mean life or death. In a coastal village, you watch native growers handle corn with the easy skill of people who have done the same work since childhood. They know the local varieties. They know which kernels to save. They know that fish can be placed near hills of corn in some soils to enrich the ground, though this practice varies by region and circumstance. They know how to plant with beans and squash, how to store dried ears, how to pound meal, how to boil hominy, and how to turn a hard kernel into something a person can actually digest and enjoy. The knowledge is not one trick. It is a whole system. You follow an English settler as he tries to learn. His boots sink into damp spring earth. The soil is cool when he kneels, and it clings beneath his fingernails. He may think he is being shown a simple task. Make a hole, drop a seed, cover it. Wait. Easy enough. Yes, adorable. The field has more opinions than that. Planting too early risks rot. Planting too late risks frost. Too close, and plants crowd each other. Too shallow, and birds hold a banquet. Too deep, and the seed sulks underground forever. The instruction comes with gestures, not just words. A hand points to space in it. A heel presses soil. A finger breaks apart a clod. The settler watches, nods, and tries to remember. Around him, the forest drips from recent rain. The smell of leaf mould rises rich and dark. Somewhere, water taps from branches in slow drops. The atmosphere is quiet, but beneath it you feel the tension of dependence. No one likes needing help from people they do not fully understand, especially when pride has crossed an ocean with them in very uncomfortable shoes. At Plymouth, stories often focus on Tisquantum, commonly called Squanto, helping English settlers learn local food ways. His life is far more complicated than the neat classroom version. He had been taken across the Atlantic, lived through extraordinary displacement, and returned to a changed homeland. Around him stood Wampanoag diplomacy, strategy, grief, and calculation, not merely a cheerful lesson in planting. Researchers continue to disagree about how much early colonial survival should be credited to individual figures. Broader indigenous agricultural knowledge, environmental luck, or later storytelling that tidied the mess into something easier to celebrate. History, inconveniently, refuses to behave like a children's pageant. You smell corn being cooked in a settlement kettle. It is not sweet summer corn, bitten fresh from a cob. This is dried grain, cracked and simmered, thickening into a porridge that settlers may call samp or hasty pudding depending on place, habit, and how fancy they are feeling. Steam fogs the room. The meal tastes plain, earthy, and slightly smoky. Add beans, squash, fish, or meat when available, and it becomes stronger. Eat it alone for too long, and you begin to understand both gratitude and boredom at the same time. Cornmeal soon enters colonial kitchens in many forms. It becomes bread baked on hearthstones, cakes fried in fat, mush served in wooden bowls, and travel food carried by people moving through rough country. Wheat remains culturally prized by many Europeans, partly because habits can be snobbish even when starving. But wheat does not always thrive in the same soils, climates, or frontier conditions. Maize is more forgiving, more productive, and less impressed by European nostalgia. A quirky tidbit drifts through the kitchen smoke. Some English speakers called maize Indian corn not because it was from India, but because Indian had become their confused label for the peoples of the Americas. Across Europe, maize also picked up strange names suggesting it came from Turkey, Egypt, or other faraway places, because apparently when Europeans were unsure where a crop came from, they often just pointed vaguely east and hoped geography would not complain. The plant gathered mistaken identities as easily as pollen. You step into Jamestown, where the river air is heavy, damp, and mosquito loud. The water nearby can turn brackish. Summer heat presses on the skin like a wet blanket. English dreams of profit run into disease, hunger, and a landscape that cannot be bullied into becoming England. Corn from Powhatan communities becomes essential, but trade is tangled with suspicion and coercion. Settlers want food. Native communities want metal goods, alliances, restraint, and respect for boundaries. These wants do not always fit neatly together. You watch a tense exchange near the edge of a field. A basket changes hands. Eyes measure intention. A wrong move could sour everything. Corn is present as food, but also as political language. To give it may express power as much as generosity. To withhold it may be a warning. To seize it may be an act of aggression. The kernels are small, but the meanings around them are heavy. Inside a palisaded settlement, the sound of a mortar pounding corn continues into evening. Thump, pause, thump, pause. A woman turns dried grain into meal, her shoulders tired, her palms rough from work. The rhythm is almost soothing until you remember why it matters. Stored corn stretches the distance between life and hunger. It lets families endure winters when ships are late, hunts fail, or trade breaks down. It feeds livestock too, because animals are another form of stored wealth. With hooves and terrible manners, colonists gradually adapt maize to their own food habits while borrowing heavily from indigenous methods. They grind it with European-style mills when they can. They bake it into breads that are denser than wheat loaves. They distill it, boil it, roast it, and feed it to pigs. Corn becomes ordinary with remarkable speed, which is what humans often do with borrowed survival. First they resist it, then they rely on it, Then they act as though it was their idea all along. Yet the story is not gentle at its core. The spread of colonial farming brings land hunger. Fields expand where native communities already farm, hunt, fish, and travel. Fences appear. Livestock wander into indigenous fields and ruin crops. Colonial law increasingly favours settlers. Corn, once learned from native growers, becomes part of the machinery by which newcomers remain, multiply, and push outward. It is a food of survival, but survival for one group can become pressure on another. The quiet ear of maize carries that contradiction. You stand in a rough doorway at dusk. Rain has stopped. Smoke lifts from wet roofs. Somewhere beyond the settlement, frogs begin their night music. The smell of corn mush, damp wool, and wood ash fills the room behind you. A bowl warms your hands. You feel the grainy thickness on your tongue, plain but sustaining. No feast announces itself. No golden field waves in the moonlight. There is only enough food for another day, which in a hungry colony is almost a miracle. The lesson is uncomfortable and simple. Corn teaches the newcomers that knowledge belongs to place. A seed is not useful without the wisdom around it. The settlers may carry tools, books, weapons, ambitions, and prayers across the sea, but none of those alone can tell them how to plant in strange soil. They must learn from the people whose fields already speak the language of this land. Whether they listen with humility is another matter, and history, being history, keeps its face calm while people make complicated choices. Night settles over the settlement. The fire dims to red eyes. Outside, the wind moves through trees that have heard many languages and will hear many more. In a basket near the wall, dried ears of corn rest under a cloth, safe from mice, moisture, and careless hands. They look humble. They are not humble at all. They are permission to wake tomorrow. You wake to the sound of a rooster who appears to believe the entire countryside has been waiting for his personal announcement. The sky is still grey, the cabin walls still holding the night's coolness, and the packed dirt floor feels firm beneath your bare feet. Outside, mist lies low over the fields. It beads on corn leaves, clings to fence rails, and softens the shapes of trees until the world looks half remembered. The air smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and meal already warming near the hearth. You're in the rough interior of early America, where corn is no longer only a lesson in survival. It has become routine. That is how powerful things often work. They stop looking dramatic because everyone depends on them too much to stare. Corn sits in sacks, here hangs from rafters, dries in cribs, thickens in pots, feeds chickens, fattens pigs, steadies horses, fills bellies, stretches poor diets, and slips into nearly every corner of daily life. It is not glamorous. It is useful, which may be the more dangerous form of influence. The mainstream fact here is plain. By the 18th and early 19th centuries, our corn had become a staple crop across much of colonial and early United States agriculture, especially in the South and on frontier farms, where it fed people and livestock and supported expanding settlement. Wheat had prestige. Rice and tobacco had export importance in certain regions, but corn was the daily worker. Corn did not need applause. Corn showed up for breakfast, dinner, feed time, barter, whiskey making, and the endless human project of getting through the year. You step outside and feel the wet brush of leaves against your hands. The stalks stand in uneven rows, taller than a child, lower than a dream of abundance, green and whispering as the morning breeze moves through them. Each leaf has a rough edge. Each tassel waits to shed pollen. You hear a hoe striking soil, a pig grunting behind a rail fence, a bucket handle knocking against someone's knee. Work begins before the sun clears the trees, because crops do not care whether humans feel well rested. Very inconsiderate of them, honestly. On a small frontier farm, corn grows because it is forgiving enough to reward people who are short on cash. tools, labour, and patience. A family can plant it with simple equipment. They can eat part of it green in summer, dry the rest for winter, grind it into meal, feed it to animals, and turn surplus into something easier to transport. Corn is bulky as grain, but pigs can walk themselves to market after eating it, which is one of history's less elegant but more practical supply chains. You follow a path toward a hog pen where animals root and shove each other with complete lack of manners. Their hides are bristly under the hand, warm and coarse. They eat cracked corn and kitchen scraps, transforming plant calories into meat, lard, and trade value. In many households, the pig is almost a walking pantry, though not a quiet one. Nearby, chickens scratch under the crib for fallen kernels. A horse noses a trough. Corn feeds the farm that feeds the family that tends the corn. It is a circle, and like many circles in history, it involves a surprising amount of mud. Inside the cabin, the hearth glows orange. Cornmeal pours through fingers with a soft, sandy hiss. It smells faintly sweet, toasted, and dusty, mixed with water, milk, or buttermilk when available. It becomes batter for ash cakes, hoe cakes, johnny cakes, spoon bread, mush, and cornbread. Names vary by region, class, and habit. Some cakes bake on a board, some on a hoe blade near coals, some in a skillet slicked with fat. You hear the batter sizzle as it touches iron. The smell rises warm and comforting, with a browned edge that makes hunger sit up politely. Cornbread is not just food, it is speed, it is thrift. It is the answer to a household asking what can be made now with what is here, before someone starts complaining dramatically near the doorway. Wheat bread often requires more careful milling, more dependable flour, and sometimes yeast. Cornbread can be blunt and immediate. Stir, pour, bake, eat. Its texture may be crumbly, dense, tender, gritty, or dry enough to make you question all your life choices, depending on the cook, the meal, and the mood of the fire. Now you walk into the plantation south, where corn carries a heavier silence. The fields are broad, the air is humid. Cicadas drone in the heat with a steady metallic pulse. Soil sticks to ankles. The smell of sweat, green leaves, manure, and distant smoke hangs thick in the afternoon. Here, corn grows alongside cash crops such as tobacco, rice, indigo, cotton, and sugar in different regions. It feeds enslaved people whose forced labour creates wealth for others. It feeds mules and horses used in that labour. It feeds hogs that supply meat rations. It supports an economy built on violence to control and extraction, even when the plant itself remains quiet and green. You stand near a provision ground where enslaved people cultivate food in the narrow spaces left to them, sometimes on small plots during limited hours. These gardens may include corn, beans, greens, sweet potatoes, peas, okra, herbs, and other crops, depending on region and access. The work is exhausting because it comes on top of forced labour already demanded by plantation schedules. Yet such plots can offer crucial food, a bit of autonomy, and sometimes goods to sell or trade. You feel the handle of a hoe worn smooth by hands. You hear low voices moving between rows. You smell crushed leaves and smoke drifting from cabins at the edge of the fields. Cornmeal appears in rations, often monotonous and insufficient without the skill of the people who cook and supplement it. Enslaved cooks transform limited ingredients into sustaining meals through knowledge, improvisation, and memory. They boil meal into mush, bake it into cakes, mix it with greens or beans, stretch it with drippings, and carry foodways that blend African, Indigenous, and European influences under brutal circumstances. A pot simmering over coals may contain more history than the fine dining room nearby, though the dining room will almost certainly get more compliments from visitors. History has a terrible habit of praising the polished table and ignoring the hands that fed it. There is scholarly uncertainty here too. researchers continue to debate how much corn enslaved people received in the different regions and periods. Because plantation records are uneven, owners often exaggerated their own generosity, and daily survival depended on informal gardens, hunting, fishing, trading, and cooking practices that were not always written down. The archive has gaps large enough to walk through. You can read ration lists, account books, and travellers' descriptions. But you still have to listen for lives that were deliberately made hard to record. A quirky tidbit flickers in the warm kitchen air. The word pone, often used for a kind of cornbread, likely comes through indigenous languages and colonial usage, while Johnny cake has inspired several competing origin stories. Some say it came from journey cake, a durable food for travel. Others argue for different linguistic roots. No one seems fully willing to let a simple corn cake have a simple name. Even bread, apparently, would like a little mystery. You move north and west into backcountry cabins where corn becomes the crop of rough independence. Settlers clear trees by girdling trunks, burning brush, and planting between stumps. The first fields look ragged, roots catch ploughs, stones bruise tools, smoke from clearing fires smells sharp and resinous. The ground is uneven beneath your feet, and every step reminds you that turning forest into farmland is not romantic while you're doing it. It is sweaty, dangerous work full of splinters, insects, and optimism that may or may not deserve encouragement. Corn thrives in these raw fields better than many crops. It can be planted among stumps. It yields heavily. It becomes meal for the table and feed for animals. When families produce more than they can eat, they may distill it into whiskey, which is easier to store and transport than sacks of grain over miserable roads. Whiskey becomes money, medicine, hospitality, comfort, trouble, and occasionally the reason someone wakes up regretting a fiddle tune. Corn, once again, changes form to fit the world humans have made around it. You hear a mill wheel turning beside a creek. Water slaps the paddles. Gears groan. Inside, the mill smells of damp wood, flour dust, and old grain. Kernels pour between stones and emerge as meal, warm from friction. The miller takes a share as payment. Farmers gossip while they wait. News travels with grain. Who married, who died, who bought land, who lost a cow, who says the road will improve, which everyone politely doubts. The mill is not merely a machine. It is a neighbourhood's listening post. At supper, you sit near a table worn smooth by elbows. A bowl of corn mush steams beside salted pork, beans, or greens. The spoon is wooden, slightly rough on the lip. Outside, night insects begin their soft chorus. A baby sleeps in a cradle. An older child picks crumbs from the table with great seriousness. The meal is plain, but plain does not mean meaningless. Corn carries the taste of labour and the comfort of enough. Enough is a small word with a large shadow. In towns, markets, and ports, corn also moves as trade. Barrels of meal, sacks of grain, and livestock fattened on corn connect farms to wider economies. Corn helps supply ships, feed workers, and sustain military posts. It crosses class lines, though not equally. Wealthier tables may prefer wheat breads and refined dishes, but corn remains close by, especially in regions where climate and labour make it practical. Poor households rely on it. Enslaved households are forced to depend on it. Frontier households build routines around it. Animals convert it into marketable flesh. Distillers turn it into spirits. Everyone, in one way or another, is negotiating with the same plant. You return to the field in late afternoon. The sun lowers, and the corn leaves shine with a dull green light. A breeze moves through the rows with a dry, papery murmur. You smell dust now, not morning damp, and the faint sweetness of ripening ears. Your palm closes around a husk. It is fibrous, cool in the shaded folds, rough at the tips. Inside, kernels are filling, row by row, storing the work of sun and rain in a form people can carry, grind, trade, hide, hoard, share, or fight over. Corn in this world is humble only on the surface. It is in the cabin and the plantation quarter, the mill and the still, the pig trough and the soldier's sack, the poor family's pot and the landlord's ledger. It feeds expansion while also revealing inequality. It comforts and confines. It makes endurance possible for people with very different amounts of freedom. The same golden meal can warm a child, sustain a labourer, enrich an owner, and fatten an animal headed to market. Evening settles slowly. Smoke rises blue from chimneys. Somewhere a fiddle starts, thin and wavering. Somewhere else a tired person scrapes the last cornmeal from a bowl and sets it aside for washing. The field outside darkens into rows of shadow. In that darkness, corn is no longer strange, no longer new, no longer a borrowed wonder. It has become ordinary America, which is another way of saying it has become almost impossible to live without. You step into prairie morning, and the first thing you notice is the space. It opens around you in every direction, wide enough to make the sky feel like a roof built by someone with extravagant taste. Grass rolls to the horizon in long waves, silver where dew catches the light, dark where the wind presses it flat. The air smells of wet roots, sun-warmed stems, and black soil turned open by a blade. Meadowlarks call from fence posts. Insects tick and buzz inside the grass. Far away, thunder mutters like an old farmer considering whether to complain. This is the great middle of the continent, the future corn belt. Though standing here you feel less like you're in a belt and more like you're standing inside a sea. The soil beneath you is deep, dark, and rich with centuries of prairie life. Roots have grown, died, and fed the ground in layers. Fire has swept through and returned nutrients. Rain has soaked in. Earthworms and microbes have worked silently, without needing applause, which is more than can be said for many human institutions. The mainstream historical fact here is clear. During the 19th century, corn production expanded dramatically across the Midwest, especially in states such as Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and later Nebraska and Kansas, helped by prairie soils, settlement, new farm tools, railroads, and growing markets for meat and grain. Corn became one of the defining crops of the region, not because the prairie politely volunteered itself, but because people, animals, machines, laws, and markets pushed hard against the land until it yielded rows. You walk beside a farmer guiding a plough through soil so dark it looks almost blue in the cool light. The horses breathe steam. Leather harness creaks. The ploughshare slices into the prairie sod with a tearing sound, as if the earth is cloth being ripped. The first years are difficult. Prairie grasses have roots like tangled rope, tough and deep, holding the soil with stubborn brilliance. A light wooden plough can bounce, clog, or fail completely. The land is fertile, but it is not easily opened. The prairie is not an empty table waiting for dinner. It is a living mat with a grip. Then comes the steel plough, especially associated with John Deere in the 1830s, with polished metal that sheds sticky soil more effectively than older designs. You watch it cut more cleanly, the blade shining briefly as each strip rolls over. The sound is smoother now, a wet, heavy curl of earth turning under. Farmers notice. They always notice anything that saves time, sweat, and the urge to say unkind things to equipment. A better plough does not make farming easy, but it makes prairie farming more possible. Touch the soil after the plough passes. It is cool, crumbly, and faintly sweet-smelling, alive with the scent of decay becoming fertility. It stains your palm. You can understand why settlers write home in amazement about land that seems capable of feeding dreams. Yet every acre broken is also an acre transformed. Tall grass prairie, with its flowers, birds, insects, and grazing animals. gives way to fields. The change happens field by field, fence by fence, deed by deed, until a vast ecosystem becomes an agricultural machine with green leaves and human paperwork. Land policy shapes this world. Survey lines divide the prairie into grids, government sales, military warrants, speculation, treaties, forced removals, and the Homestead Act all contribute to settlement patterns. You feel the abstraction of it when you stand beside a straight road cutting across rolling land. Lines on maps become fences on soil. Fences become farms. Farms become counties, taxes, schools, churches, depots, and arguments over whose bull got loose. Corn grows inside this legal geometry, its rules echoing the grid that claims the land. There is scholarly uncertainty tucked into this expansion. Agricultural historians still debate whether the Corn Belt's rise was driven more by natural advantage, such as climate and soil, or by market connections, government policy, and technological change. The honest answer is probably an untidy mixture, which is how history likes its stew. Soil mattered, rainfall mattered, human ambition mattered, railroads mattered, so did displacement, debt, family labour, animal power, credit, weather, and luck. Anyone offering one single cause may be trying to sell you something, possibly a very shiny plough. You walk toward a new farmhouse, its boards pale against the dark earth. The smell of fresh-cut lumber mixes with manure, smoke, and coffee boiling on a stove. Corn hangs in braided strings near a shed. A child carries water in a bucket that knocks against the knees. Chickens scatter with theatrical panic. The farmer's wife, whose labour is rarely measured properly in ledgers, tends food, children, garden, poultry, dairy, clothing, accounts, and sometimes field work too. The farm is not one man and a heroic sunset. It is a household economy held together by many hands, most of them tired. Corn fits this household because it is versatile. It feeds people in meal and bread. It feeds pigs and cattle. It can be sold, stored, traded, or distilled. It can stand in the field until harvest if the weather allows. In the Midwest, corn increasingly becomes connected to livestock, especially hogs. Farmers joke that pigs are corn on legs, a phrase that is not elegant but is painfully practical. Instead of hauling bulky grain over bad roads, you can feed it to animals and send meat to market. The pig performs transportation by being delicious later, which is bleak, efficient, and very 19th century. Now the railroad arrives, and the sound changes. Iron wheels clatter over rails. A whistle cries across flat land, sharp enough to startle birds into the air. Smoke trails behind the engine, smelling of coal, oil, and hot metal. Grain elevators rise beside tracks like wooden towers of confidence. Towns gather around depots. A place that was recently grass and mud now has a hotel, a general store, a livery stable, a church, a newspaper, and at least 3 men certain they know the future. Railroads alter the meaning of a cornfield. The crop is no longer only local food and feed. It becomes part of national commerce. Corn can move farther. Livestock can move to slaughterhouses, tools, lumber, seed, cloth, and manufactured goods can come in. Prices from distant cities matter in kitchens hundreds of miles away. You stand beside a depot and hear sacks thud onto platforms, hooves clatter in stock pens, and men argue over rates with the intense moral outrage usually reserved for betrayal and bad coffee. Weather remains the great ruler. The Midwest can feel generous one week and vindictive the next. Spring mud swallows wagon wheels. Summer heat presses on your neck. Drought curls leaves into tight spears. Hail shreds fields in a minute. Early frost can steal a harvest just as kernels are filling. You walk through a field during a dry spell, and the leaves rasp against each other with a brittle sound. The air smells dusty, metallic, tense. A farmer looks at the sky so often his neck should send a bill. Yet good seasons are breathtaking. By midsummer, the corn rises above your shoulders, then above your head. The rows become green corridors. Light filters through leaves in narrow strips. Pollen dusts your sleeve with yellow powder. The field hums with insects, rustles with mice, and holds the damp smell of growth. Walk too far in, and the outside world disappears. Corn has a way of making a person feel both sheltered and watched, which is not entirely relaxing, but it is memorable. A quirky tidbit from this agricultural world concerns corn husking contests. In later decades, especially in the Corn Belt, competitive husking became a public spectacle where skilled workers raced through fields pulling ears by hand. Thousands of spectators might gather to watch someone do farm labour extremely quickly, proving once again that humans can turn almost anything into a contest if there is enough pride nearby. The work itself was hard on hands and wrists. Gloves wore thin, husks scratched skin. But speed in the cornfield could become a kind of local fame. You pause at harvest. The air's cooled. Leaves are dry now, pale and rattling. Each stalk sounds like paper when the wind moves through it. A wagon waits at the field edge. Horses stamp. A man snaps an ear from the stalk, twists, tosses, and reaches for another. The motion repeats until the body becomes rhythm. Snap, husk, throw, snap, husk, throw. The wagon fills with dull yellow, red, white, and mixed ears, depending on the variety planted. Modern uniformity has not yet conquered everything. The field still carries colour. At the crib, corn is stored where air can move through it and dry the ears. The structure smells of husk, dust, and mice trying to make poor life decisions. Kernels harden as the weeks pass. Some will be shelled for feed, some will become seed, some will go to market. Choosing seed remains intimate work. A farmer examines ears for size, straight rows, fullness, and maturity. He may not understand genetics in a formal sense, but selection is happening in his hands. Every saved ear is a vote for what the farm should become. You sense pride here, but also risk. Land can be mortgaged. Prices can fall. A grasshopper swarm can arrive like a biblical editorial comment. A railroad rate can squeeze profit. A banker can become more important to a farm than rain, which feels unnatural and yet familiar. Cornfields expand because opportunity is real, but opportunity carries debt in its pocket. The dream of owning land is powerful, so is the fear of losing it. Evening comes wide and gold. The prairie wind cools your face. Smoke rises from farmhouse chimneys. Cattle low in the distance. The soil under your boots is no longer untouched grassland, but worked earth, measured, planted, harvested, and argued over. Corn stands at the centre of this transformation, drawing together family labour, machines, animals, railroads, markets, weather, and law. You look across the rows as darkness gathers between them. The plants whisper softly, dry leaves rubbing like pages in a book no one can close. This is the Corn Belt taking shape, not as a symbol yet, but as labour repeated across millions of acres. The land is being remade into food, feed, profit, settlement, and memory, and all around you, under the enormous sky, the fields keep rustling. You enter a town where corn no longer waits quietly in the field. It has come indoors, into the groan of belts, the clatter of gears, the hiss of steam, and the sharp smell of grain dust hanging in the air like pale smoke. The street outside is muddy, but inside the mill everything trembles with purpose. Wooden floors vibrate under your boots, sacks slump against walls, men shout over machinery. Somewhere overhead, a pulley spins so quickly it becomes a blur, and the whole building seems to breathe in kernels and breathe out product. The atmosphere is warmer than you expect. It smells of meal, damp wood, oil, sweat, and the faint sweetness released when corn is cracked open. Dust settles on your sleeves. It gets into your nose. It softens the outlines of beams and window light. You run your fingers along a sack and feel the rough weave, the powdery coat, the weight of grain made anonymous by scale. A single ear of corn still has shape and character. A mountain of shelled kernels is something else. It is raw material. The mainstream historical fact here is that corn became an industrial crop in the 19th and early 20th centuries, not only a food for families and animals, but a source of starch, sweeteners, alcohol, oil, livestock feed, and manufactured goods. The plant entered factories and chemical processes. It became ingredients, commodities, byproducts, and profits. Corn did not stop being a crop. It became a platform, which sounds very modern and important, though the corn itself remained modestly busy converting sunlight into carbohydrates. You watch kernels pour into a hopper with a dry rushing sound. They strike metal like hard rain. Elevators lift them upward. Screens shake. Stones grind. Rollers crush. The seed is separated into parts, each with a use. The outer hull can become feed. The germ can yield oil. The endosperm holds starch, that quiet white treasure desired by laundries, kitchens, paper makers, textile mills, and food processors. Corn is being taken apart with impressive confidence, as if humans have finally decided that even a kernel has too much privacy. In the starch works, the smell changes. It is wet, sour, and faintly fermenting. Corn soaks in large tanks until it softens. Water clouds with dissolved matter. Workers move through steam and damp heat, their shirts clinging to their backs. You touch a railing and it feels slick with condensation. The factory does not have the romance of a harvest field. It has pipes, vats, drains, and schedules. Yet here, corn becomes starch fine enough to stiffen collars, thicken sauces, glaze paper, bind materials, and slip into countless goods no one thinks of as agricultural. Cornstarch itself seems almost ghostly. It is soft between your fingers, smoother than flour, with a peculiar squeak when pressed. That squeak is oddly intimate, the sound of tiny particles resisting your skin. In kitchens, it helps thicken puddings and gravies. In laundries, it gives shirts and linens a crisp dignity, allowing people to look more respectable than they may actually feel. In factories, it becomes a binder and coating. Corn has learned to dress society, feed society, and quietly hold pieces of society together. Not bad for grass. You move toward the glucose house, where starch is transformed into syrup. The air is heavy and sweet. Steam fogs windows, copper, iron, and wooden vessels stand in rows. Workers monitor heat, acid, water, and time, coaxing starch into sugars. Corn syrup will later become common in candies, canned fruits, baked goods, and processed foods, valued because it resists crystallization and behaves reliably. Reliable sweetness is a powerful thing in an industrial world. Humans like sugar, yes, but manufacturers love sugar that follows instructions. There is scholarly uncertainty here, and it is not just about machines. Historians of food and business still argue whether corn processing grew mainly because consumers demanded cheaper sweeteners and convenient goods, or because industry created new markets for surplus corn through chemistry, advertising, and corporate scale. The boundary is blurry. People wanted affordable foods. Companies wanted profit. Farmers needed outlets for huge harvests. Scientists learned to break kernels into saleable fractions. The result looks inevitable from a distance, but up close it is a crowd of decisions, investments, accidents, and appetites. Now you follow the smell of alcohol. A distillery rises near water and transport, because corn may be abundant, but heavy things still prefer help when travelling. Inside, mash tubs steam with a thick, grainy warmth. Fermentation gives the air a yeasty, sour sweet smell that clings to your clothes. Bubbles rise lazily. Copper stills shine in low light. The floor feels damp. Barrels wait in ranks, smelling of oak, char, and promise. Corn becomes whiskey, especially in American styles where it provides sweetness, body, and identity. The sound here is slower than the mill, but no less industrial. Liquid sloshes. Coopers hammer hoops onto barrels. A bung is tapped into place with a satisfying wooden knock. Distillers learn that corn mash can be converted into spirit, and leftover mash can feed animals. Waste becomes feed. Feed becomes meat. Meat becomes money. Money becomes expansion, paperwork, and occasionally someone speaking too loudly in a tavern. Civilization is complicated. A quirky tidbit rises from the barrel house. In parts of rural America, corn cobs had afterlives almost as varied as kernels. They were used for fuel, smoking pipes, tool handles, kindling, animal bedding, and, in less delicate household arrangements, as rough cleaning material in privies. The past was resourceful, yes, but it was not always gentle. When someone says nothing was wasted, they are usually correct, and sometimes you wish they had not explained it. You step into a feed mill and the mood becomes muscular. Corn is cracked, mixed, weighed, shoveled and bagged. It feeds horses, cattle, hogs, chickens, and later vast numbers of industrial livestock. The smell is warm and dusty, with molasses in some mixes and a sharp animal tang drifting from nearby pens. Your palm sinks into a bin of ground feed, soft at first, then gritty. It holds heat from grinding. Around you, farmers and dealers talk prices, weights, rail schedules, and weather with the seriousness of diplomats negotiating peace. Corn's industrial role is inseparable from meat. A kernel can travel through a steer, a hog, or a chicken and emerge as beef, pork, eggs, or poultry. This is not magic, it is metabolism, which is magic with less flattering diagrams, in stockyards and packing centres, especially in cities linked by rail. Grain-fed animals become part of a national food system. You hear hooves on wooden ramps, gates clanging, men calling, engines idling, knives being sharpened somewhere out of sight. The smell is strong: manure, straw, blood, smoke, hot metal, and boiling water. PG-13. History does not need to linger there. It is enough to know that corn helped turn animals into standardized products for distant tables. In this expanding system, grain elevators become temples of measurement. You stand inside one as corn pours through chutes, disappears into bins, and loses the identity of the farm it came from. A farmer's wagon load blends with another's, and another's, until the crop becomes grade or weight, moisture and price. The elevator smells dry and warm, like dust, wood, and old sunlight. Men test samples with quick-test, practiced gestures. A few kernels are bitten, rubbed, inspected. The market wants quality but not personality. Commodity exchanges give corn another life, one made of paper, numbers, and speculation. Traders do not need to touch a husk to buy and sell future harvests. Prices move on weather reports, storage levels, transport costs, livestock demand, and rumour. The crop becomes an idea traded in rooms far from fields. You can almost hear the plant sigh. It worked all summer to grow an ear, and now someone in a jacket is shouting about it. Industrial corn also enters unexpected goods. It can help make adhesives, explosives, textiles, paper coatings, soaps, medicines, and biodegradable materials. Corn oil becomes a cooking fat and industrial ingredient. Corn sugars feed fermentation processes. Starch binds pills and powders. Even the cob, stripped and ground, may become absorbent material or filler. The plant spreads into daily life so thoroughly that people stop seeing it. That is one of corn's most impressive tricks. It becomes everywhere by becoming invisible. You step outside at dusk, away from the mill's heat. The town hums around you, a train whistles. Smokestacks darken the violet sky. Wagons rattle over boards. Somewhere, a saloon door opens and releases laughter, fiddle music, and the warm smell of spilled whiskey. Somewhere else, a bakery uses corn sweetener, a laundry stiffens collars with starch, a paper mill coats pages, a farmer buys feed, a stockyard fattens animals. The same crop moves through all of it, changing costume with each doorway. You pause by a rail siding where sacks and barrels wait under a shed roof. The air has cooled, but the boards still hold daytime warmth. Grain dust lies in the cracks like pale pollen. You press a kernel between finger and thumb. It is hard, smooth, and small enough to seem harmless. Yet inside it are starch chains, oil, protein, sugar waiting to be released, and the possibility of 100 industries. The kernel is no longer just food. It is a chemical package wrapped in a husk, delivered by a plant that asks mainly for soil, sun, rain, and a human system hungry enough to use every piece. Night settles over the factories. Windows glow amber. Machines slow, then stop, though the smell of warm grain remains. The silence that follows is not natural silence. It is mechanical silence, full of held breath and cooling metal. Corn has crossed a threshold. It has entered the age of industry, where abundance is broken down, refined, bottled, traded, fermented, sweetened, stiffened, fed and sold. You leave with dust on your sleeves and a faint sweetness in the air, knowing that the humble ear has become 1,000 quiet things. You enter a field that looks ordinary until you notice how carefully it has been divided. Stakes mark narrow plots. Small paper tags flutter from plants. A clipboard rests against a fence post, its pages lifting in the breeze like a nervous bird. The morning is cool, and the leaves are wet enough to brush your sleeves with dew. You smell damp soil, pollen, pencil shavings, and the faint chemical sharpness of a nearby shed where seed treatments and labels are stored. Somewhere beyond the rows, a screen door slaps shut. A crow calls once, unimpressed by science. This is corn under observation. Not just planted, hoed, harvested, and eaten, but measured, counted, compared, crossed, recorded. You walk between rows where every stalk seems to stand a little straighter because someone is judging it. Height, leaf angle, ear placement, kernel depth, maturity date, disease resistance, standability, yield. The plant has entered the world of experiment stations, university bulletins, seed companies, and farm journals. Corn is no longer shaped only by practical memory and saved ears hanging in a barn. It is being shaped by genetics. The mainstream historical fact here is that hybrid corn transformed American agriculture in the 20th century, especially from the 1930s onward, as farmers adopted seed bred from controlled crosses that often produced higher and more reliable yields than older open pollinated varieties. The change did not happen in one dramatic afternoon, with a scientist shouting, "Behold, improved carbohydrates." It came through decades of plant breeding, careful records, field trials, salesmanship, weather, prices, and farmers deciding whether a bag of seed was worth real money. You pause beside a row of inbred corn. It looks disappointing. The stalks are shorter, weaker, almost embarrassed. Inbreeding concentrates traits by making plants more genetically uniform, but it often reduces vigour. Then 2 inbred lines are crossed, and their offspring may show hybrid vigour, growing stronger and yielding better than either parent. The idea sounds simple when explained politely. In practice, it takes patience, land, labour, and a willingness to spend years watching corn behave badly before it behaves beautifully. You run a leaf between your fingers. It feels cool, ribbed, and slightly sharp along the edge. Pollen dust catches on your skin. yellow as powdered sunlight. Above you, tassels release clouds so fine they disappear almost at once. At the ear shoots, silks wait, each silk leading to one possible kernel. This intimate botanical arrangement makes controlled breeding possible, though it also makes you realize corn reproduction is surprisingly theatrical. The plant does not whisper about fertility. It waves tassels in the air and lets the wind handle the paperwork. In a breeding plot, workers remove tassels from selected rows so those plants cannot pollinate themselves. The job is called detasseling, and it becomes one of the more peculiar rural summer labours. You hear the rip and snap of tassels pulled free, the soft slap of leaves against arms, the tired shuffle of boots in mud. In many areas, young workers take on this seasonal job, moving through humid fields in long lines. The leaves scratch their wrists. Sweat runs down their backs. Mosquitoes treat everyone as a community buffet. Science, as it turns out, sometimes looks like teenagers in a cornfield wishing the morning were over. The atmosphere shifts when you step inside a small seed office. Wooden drawers hold packets labelled with numbers and initials. Charts are pinned to the walls. A calendar curls at the corners. The room smells of paper, dust, ink, dry kernels, and coffee that has been sitting too long. A scent common to serious agricultural thinking. On a table, ears are arranged in rows, each tagged and judged. Some are long and smooth, some are stubby, some have kernels set deep in straight ranks. Others look irregular, as if the plant had a creative but undisciplined personality. Here is a quirky tidbit from the age of improvement. Seed corn shows once treated ears almost like livestock at a fair, with judges examining shape, row straightness, kernel uniformity, and cob proportions. A handsome ear could win praise even if beauty did not always predict field performance. Imagine corn being judged like a pageant contestant, except the evening wear category is husk removal, and everyone smells faintly of barn dust. It is charming, and also a reminder that farmers often had to evaluate seed by eye before genetic testing and modern data became common. You open a seed catalogue and hear the dry crackle of paper. The illustrations are confident. Claims are sunny. New varieties promise stronger stalks, bigger yields, better drought tolerance, earlier maturity, and brighter futures, because seed catalogues have never been shy. Names leap from the page like little advertisements for hope. Golden Queen, Reed's Yellow Dent, Learning, Lancaster. Later hybrids carry numbers and brands that sound less romantic but more scientific. A farmer reading such a catalogue has to decide whether the promise is real, exaggerated, or merely expensive. Scholars still disagree about whether farmers adopted hybrid corn mainly because of superior yields, aggressive seed company marketing, public research support, or economic pressure during hard years. The strongest answer refuses to pick just one. Higher yields mattered, demonstration plots mattered, trusted neighbours mattered, agricultural extension agents mattered. So did the fact that hybrid seed usually did not reproduce the same performance if saved and replanted. Encouraging farmers to buy new seed each season, that shifted power. Seed became less of a household possession and more of a commercial input. You feel the weight of that change when you hold a cloth seed bag. It is heavier than it looks, filled with kernels that represent research, contracts, branding, and a new dependence on the seed trade. The fabric is coarse against your palm. Printed lettering promises quality. The farmer who buys it may gain yield and uniformity, but gives up some older habits of selecting and saving seed from the best ears at home. Progress arrives carrying gifts in one hand and invoices in the other, very generous, very organised, and not entirely innocent. The figure of Henry A. Wallace belongs in this world, not as a bedtime statue, but as a person deeply involved in promoting hybrid corn and founding what became a major seed company. Public experiment stations, university researchers, and private breeders all contribute to the rise of hybrids. The story is crowded with names, plots, notebooks, failed crosses, and improved lines. You do not need to memorize them in the dark. It is enough to feel the shift from seed as local inheritance to seed as engineered product. In the field, uniformity becomes visible. The plants stand at similar heights, ears set at similar levels, maturity arrives more evenly, harvest becomes more predictable. Machines like predictability. Markets enjoy it too. So do lenders, insurers, and everyone who prefers the messy living world to behave like a spreadsheet, which it bravely refuses to do completely. Still, hybrid corn helps farms produce more grain from the same acre. In good conditions, the results can be startling. A field becomes a factory made of leaves, yet the narrowing begins quietly. Older local varieties do not vanish all at once, but many lose ground. Seed diversity declines where farmers shift toward a smaller number of commercial lines. The rows look strong, but strength of one kind can hide vulnerability of another. A uniform field may yield wonderfully, yet if disease or weather finds a weakness shared by many plants, trouble can move quickly. Diversity is not only pretty, it is a form of memory, a crowded backup plan written in living tissue. You walk through a test plot in late afternoon. The air is warm and humid. Leaves brush your shoulders with a whispering sound. Bees drift near field edges where weeds and flowers remain. A notebook page sticks slightly under your hand from sweat. You stop at a plant with an ear bag tied around the silk, a small paper cover used to control pollination. The bag crinkles when you touch it. Inside that little protected space, a breeder is arranging ancestry. It feels oddly intimate, like matchmaking for a plant with major economic consequences. Farmers are not passive in this transformation. They test hybrids, complain about them, compare yields, swap stories at elevators, attend field days, and decide what to plant. You stand at one of those field days where men and women gather in straw hats and work shoes while an expert explains trial results. The air smells of trampled grass, tobacco smoke, warm lemonade, and dust. Someone asks whether the new hybrid stands well in wind. Someone else wants to know how it performs on poorer soil. A third person mutters that last year's seed cost too much, which may be the most timeless agricultural comment ever recorded. The Great Depression adds pressure. Farmers need more from every acre, even as prices collapse and debt tightens. Hybrid seed can look risky because it costs money up front, but higher yields can be persuasive. By the 1940s, adoption spreads widely across the Corn Belt. The harvest numbers change. Corn becomes more abundant, more standardized, and more deeply tied to research institutions and agribusiness. A new agricultural order takes root, one bag at a time. You stand near a corn crib at dusk, listening to kernels settle with tiny clicks. The smell is dry, sweet, and dusty. A farmer pours seed into a planter box, and the kernels rattle against metal like small bones of sunlight. Each one looks simple. Each one carries hidden parentage, controlled crossing, selection, testing, and calculation. The field that grows from it will seem natural from the road, just green rows under weather. But inside those rows is a scientific argument made visible. Night comes slowly over the experiment station. Windows glow in the laboratory. Crickets begin their careful music. The plots fade into dark blocks divided by stakes and paths. You can still feel pollen on your sleeve and leaf scratches along your wrist. Corn has become a study in inheritance, a promise of plenty, and a question about what is lost when abundance grows more uniform. In the hush of the field, the seed rests small and hard in your hand, carrying both triumph and unease in the same quiet shell. You walk into a country at war, and the cornfield no longer feels like a quiet rural place. It feels like part of a machine larger than any one farm. The rows stand under a pale summer sky, leaves lifting and twisting in the wind, while far away factories hammer metal, trains pull freight, and soldiers eat from tins in places they may never have imagined seeing. The field smells of hot dust, green stalks, and faint fertilizer. Grasshoppers click from leaf to leaf. A plane drones somewhere overhead, small as a beetle against the clouds. The mainstream fact here is that corn became deeply important to American wartime and post-war supply systems, feeding livestock, supporting industrial production, and entering processed foods that help reshape the national diet. During the World Wars, and especially during the enormous mobilization of the 1940s, corn was not just something growing in the Midwest. It was feed for animals, starch for factories, sweetener for food makers, alcohol for industry, and calories moving through military and civilian life. You stand beside a farmhouse radio as a news bulletin crackles through static. The wooden cabinet is warm from use. Voices speak of battles, rationing, production goals, bonds, victory, sacrifice. The room smells of coffee, fried cornmeal, machine oil on work clothes, and dust from a road that never quite settles. Outside, a farmer checks machinery with hands already rough from repairs. Every acre has a new kind of pressure on it. Grow more, waste less, feed the troops, feed the workers, feed the animals that feed the nation. Corn answers as it often does, not dramatically but in volume. It enters hogs, cattle, chickens, and dairy cows. It becomes pork in a soldier's ration, eggs in a factory worker's breakfast, milk for children, lard in a kitchen, and beef for mess halls. The path from kernel to meal is not always visible. A person may never see the field that fed the animal that became the meat on a plate. Corn disappears by becoming something else. You move into a wartime feed mill. The sound is relentless. Belts slap, motors hum, augers turn with a grinding murmur. Ground corn pours into sacks with a soft, heavy rush. The air is thick and yellowed with dust. It settles on eyebrows, sleeves, and the backs of hands. A worker coughs into a handkerchief, then ties another sack. The fabric scratches your palm when you lift it. It is not romantic work, but it has purpose. In war, even dust seems enlisted. At a rail yard, corn travels with military urgency. Boxcars wait under soot-darkened skies. Men load sacks and crates while steam hisses around wheels. The smell of coal smoke mixes with grain, creosote, wet wool, and hot iron. You hear whistles, shouted numbers, coupling chains clanking together. Everything seems to move by schedule, and yet everything also seems slightly late. The war eats time as hungrily as it eats fuel. Cornstarch moves toward factories where it becomes part of paper, textiles, adhesives, and food processing. Corn sugars assist fermentation and supply sweetness when other ingredients are limited or expensive. Industrial alcohol made from grain can become solvents, chemicals, and materials needed in manufacturing. The line between farm and factory blurs until a field seems to stretch right into the brick buildings of a city. Corn roots are in the soil, but its influence runs through pipes, vats, rail cars, kitchens, and military depots. You enter a canning plant where vegetables, and meat products, and soups, and rations are packed with astonishing speed. The floor is damp, metal cans clatter in shining lines. Steam rolls from kettles and hangs near the ceiling. The smell is a confusing fog of salt, cooked vegetables, tin, starch, and hot machinery. Workers stand for hours, their hands moving faster than conversation. Corn may be present as kernels, syrup, starch, feed behind the meat, or thickener in prepared foods. It is there plainly and secretly, which is very much its style. Scholars still argue over how much wartime food habits were driven by necessity and how much by companies using emergency production to train Americans into accepting more packaged, standardized, and processed meals. Rationing mattered. Military logistics mattered. Women working in factories mattered. Advertising mattered. Technology mattered. Convenience, once discovered, had a way of refusing to go politely back into the cupboard. The war did not invent processed food, but it accelerated trust in it. A quirky tidbit from this era is that popcorn enjoyed a surprising boom during the Second World War. Sugar rationing made candy harder to produce and buy, while popcorn remained relatively available, cheap, and cheerful. Movie theatres smelled of butter, salt, and warm kernels, offering a small, crackling comfort while newsreels showed a world on fire. It is strange and human that a nation could worry over invasion maps and still find relief in a paper bag of popping corn. History is often like that. Terror and snacks sharing the same lobby. You sit for a moment in one of those theatres. The seat fabric is scratchy beneath your fingers. The floor is faintly sticky. The projector rattles behind you, throwing silver light through a cone of dust around you. People chew quietly, laugh when they can, and fall silent when the newsreel begins. The smell of popcorn fills the dark like a warm blanket. It is not a grand symbol, just a simple pleasure, but simple pleasures can hold a tired public together for an evening. On the farm, labour changes, young men leave for military service, women, older men, teenagers, and hired workers take on expanded duties. Machinery is needed, but metal and rubber may be scarce. Repair becomes a skill of national importance. You hear a wrench slip, a muttered complaint, then the renewed clink of metal on metal. The tractor seat is hot from sun. Grease smears your fingers. Corn does not pause because someone has been drafted. The field waits, and waiting crops have no sympathy. Victory gardens receive public attention, but large farms and commercial agriculture carry immense supply burdens. Cornfields must produce feed and raw material, while weather remains its usual unreliable self. Summer rains can save a crop, drought can weaken it, floods can drown low fields. The atmosphere of wartime farming is a mix of patriotic posters and very practical anxiety. A poster may say every bushel matters. The farmer may reply, "Yes, please explain that to the clouds." Then peace arrives. But the systems built for abundance do not simply vanish. Factories retool, chemical production expands, fertilizers, pesticides, improved machinery, hybrid seed, rural electrification, and government programs help push yields higher. You step into a post-war field and sense a new confidence. Tractors are stronger, planters are more precise, corn stands in cleaner, straighter rows, the soil smells of turned earth and ammonia-rich fertilizer. The farmer's hands rest on a steering wheel instead of leather reins. The engine's vibration travels through the seat into the bones. The post-war supermarket becomes corn's new stage, though it rarely appears with applause. You enter through sliding doors into chilled brightness. Fluorescent lights hum softly overhead. The floor gleams. Carts rattle. The air smells of waxed cardboard, fresh bread, floor cleaner, oranges, and cold dairy cases. Corn is here as breakfast cereal. Corn oil, corn syrup, cornstarch, snack foods, frozen vegetables, baking mixes, animal-fed meat, eggs, milk, and countless packaged goods. The field has become an aisle, then a label, then an ingredient line so small you almost miss it. Children pour cornflakes into bowls before school. Mothers, often targeted by post-war advertising as household managers, are sold convenience in boxes, cans, and mixes. Fathers carve roasts from animals raised on grain. Lunch boxes hold sandwiches, sweets, and snacks touched by corn in ways nobody at the table needs to understand. The nation's diet becomes more industrial, more abundant, more standardized, and more dependent on invisible chains of supply. Plenty arrives wrapped in cellophane. You can hear that plenty in a kitchen. A refrigerator hums, a can opener bites into metal, cereal rattles into a bowl, oil whispers in a pan. The touch of packaging is smooth, printed, clean, and strangely impersonal. Food has travelled farther, lasted longer, and required less daily preparation than the meals of earlier households. This is liberation for some, loss for others, and both for many. Convenience can be a blessing when time is short. It can also make the origins of food feel distant, as if dinner came from a shelf rather than soil. Corn also supports the booming meat culture of the post-war United States. Feedlots grow larger, poultry production becomes more efficient, pork and beef become central to ideas of prosperity. A full plate of meat suggests success, stability, and the comfortable dream of the suburban table. Yet hidden behind that plate are fields, feed mills, rail lines, veterinary science, refrigeration, slaughterhouses, price supports, and rivers carrying runoff from fertilized land. The meal is simple only if you do not follow it backward. You stand outside a supermarket at night, holding a paper bag against your hip. The bag is heavy, its folded top rough against your wrist. Cars roll past under neon signs. Somewhere far beyond the parking lot, cornfields rustle in darkness, feeding systems that now feel too large for any single person to picture. The crop has become abundance itself, but abundance has a way of becoming invisible when it succeeds. That is the quiet transformation of this age. Corn helps feed war, then helps feed peace. It moves through armies, factories, barns, kitchens, lunch counters, school cafeterias, grocery shelves, and television dinners. It becomes less like an object and more like an atmosphere, surrounding daily life without asking to be noticed. You may not see the ear, the husk, or the field. Still, the plant is there, folded into the sweetness, thickness, crispness, fatness, cheapness, and plenty of modern America outside. The night air smells faintly of asphalt cooling after heat. A truck passes with a low diesel growl. Crickets sing from a ditch beside the road. In the distance, a grain elevator rises against the moonlit sky, pale and still. Corners move from hand to field, to factory, to ration, to supermarket shelf. It has become common enough to vanish, and powerful enough that vanishing may be its greatest disguise. You stand in a grocery aisle so bright and polished it feels almost unreal. A corridor of colour humming under fluorescent lights. Cans shine in tight rows. Cereal boxes stare forward with cheerful confidence. Bottles of soda glow amber, red, purple, and green, as if someone has bottled a carnival and stacked it at eye level. The floor is cool through the soles of your shoes. Somewhere nearby, a freezer sighs. A cartwheel squeaks with tragic persistence, announcing one small mechanical problem to the entire store. Corn is here, though not always where your eyes expect it. It hides in sweeteners, starches, oils, thickeners, coatings, flavour carriers, animal feed behind meat and dairy, and packaging materials that touch the food without introducing themselves. The air smells faintly of cardboard, citrus cleaner, bread, and cold plastic. You pick up a bottle and read the label. There it is. Corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, modified corn starch, dextrose, maltodextrin, corn oil. Corn has become a shapeshifter so skilled that even a detective would need a snack and a quiet room. The mainstream fact at the heart of this modern scene is that, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, American corn became deeply tied to processed food, livestock feed, ethanol fuel, export markets, and government policy. The crop was no longer only a field harvest, it was a pillar of a national system built around abundance, low-cost calories, energy politics, global trade, and industrial agriculture. Corn did not merely feed America, it entered the machinery of America's appetite. You walk out of the supermarket and into a processing plant where sweetness is engineered with remarkable precision. The building smells wet, warm, and faintly sour, like soaked grain and steam. Pipes run overhead, tanks gleam under white lights. Workers in hairnets and boots move across damp floors with practiced calm. Cornstarch is broken down into sugars, and some of those sugars are converted into fructose, producing high fructose corn syrup. It flows clear and thick, heavy as liquid glass, sweet enough to vanish into soft drinks, baked goods, sauces, snacks, and countless packaged foods. The syrup has no romance. It does not crackle in husks over a fire or steam from a wooden bowl. It is industrial sweetness, predictable, transportable, and obedient. Food companies value it because it blends easily, preserves texture, and can be less costly than other sweeteners under certain market conditions. Consumers encounter it not as a single dramatic ingredient, but as an invisible softness in the modern diet. A soda on a hot day, a packaged cake after school, a sauce that tastes a little sweeter than expected, a breakfast bar pretending to be virtuous while quietly wearing a tiny sugar hat. You unscrew a bottle cap and hear the hiss of carbonation. The scent rises sharp and sweet, a bright artificial fruit smell that touches the back of the throat. The liquid is cold against your fingers through the plastic. You take a sip, and the sweetness arrives instantly, then fades into a faint syrupy coat. It is pleasant, almost too easy. That ease is part of the story. A crop once ground by hand now slips into the body through convenience, branding, habit, and thirst. Public health researchers have debated the role of corn sweeteners in rising rates of obesity and metabolic disease, though the question is not as simple as blaming one ingredient and going home early. Tempting as that may be, total calories, portion sizes, activity levels, food marketing, poverty, stress, urban design, and many other factors matter. Still, high fructose corn syrup became a symbol of unease because it represented more than sweetness. It represented processed abundance, cheap calories, and the uncomfortable feeling that the food system had become cleverer than the eater. Now the scene changes, and you stand beside a highway where semi-trucks move like great metal beetles under the afternoon sun. Many carry grain toward elevators, feedlots, ethanol plants, ports, and processors. Diesel fumes mix with the smell of hot asphalt and cut grass. Wind pushes against your shirt, beyond the road. Cornfields stretch in disciplined rows, green or dry depending on the season, their scale hard to grasp from the ground. A single field is comprehensible. Millions of acres become almost abstract. Ethanol draws you into another chapter of corn's modern life. You enter a plant where grain is ground, cooked, fermented, distilled, and turned into fuel alcohol. The air smells like warm bread, sour mash, wet grain, and metal. Fermentation tanks rise like silent towers. Pipes hum, pumps throb. The floor vibrates faintly under your boots. Corn is becoming gasoline's companion, blended into fuel tanks across the country. The idea carries a certain poetry. Sunlight captured by leaves, turned into starch, fermented into alcohol, burned in engines. The poetry is real, but so are the arguments. Ethanol supporters have seen it as a way to support farmers, reduce dependence on petroleum, oxygenate fuel, and create rural industry. Critics have questioned its environmental benefits, its demand for land and water, its connection to fertilizer runoff, and its effect on food and feed markets. Researchers still dispute how corn ethanol should be judged when land use, greenhouse gases, energy inputs, farm economics, and fuel policy are all counted together. The answer depends on what is measured, where the corn is grown, how the plant is powered, and which assumptions are allowed into the room. Assumptions, like raccoons, can cause a lot of trouble once inside. A quirky tidbit waits in the fuel pump itself. In the United States, many gasoline blends contain ethanol, often around 10%. So countless drivers have burned corn without thinking of themselves as participants in agricultural history. You pull up to a pump, hear the click of the nozzle, smell the sharp fumes, and somewhere in that ordinary errand is a field, a fermenter, a policy debate, and a farmer checking the sky. The commute has become part corn, which sounds absurd until you remember that modern life specializes in absurdity with receipts. You travel onward to a feedlot, where corn's roll becomes louder and less hidden. The air changes before the place appears. It smells of manure, dust, silage, and animal heat. Cattle shift behind fences, hooves pressing into packed earth. Feed trucks rumble by, pouring rations into long bunks with a heavy rushing sound. The mix may include cracked corn, silage, distillers' grains from ethanol production, hay, minerals, and other ingredients. Corn helps bring animals to market weight efficiently, turning grain into meat at industrial scale. The touch of the feed is warm and uneven, gritty with cracked kernels, damp in places, sweet-sour from fermented silage. Birds gather nearby, bold and opportunistic. Workers move quickly because the animals are many and the schedule is tight. This is not the pastoral painting on a butter package. It is concentrated, practical, and controversial. Corn-fed meat has helped make beef, pork, poultry, eggs, and dairy widely available. But the system also raises questions about animal welfare, antibiotic use, manure management, water quality, and the distance between eaters and the lives behind their meals. You step toward a river after rain, the bank is soft beneath your shoes, and the water runs brown with silt. In agricultural regions, fertilizer and soil can wash from fields into streams, carrying nitrogen and phosphorus downstream. The air smells wet, green, and muddy. Frogs call from reeds. The sound is peaceful, but the chemistry may not be. Nutrient runoff from corn and other crops can contribute to algal blooms and low oxygen zones in waterways, including the Gulf of Mexico. The field and the ocean are connected by water, whether or not anyone at the field edge can see the sea. The corn plant itself is not guilty in some cartoonish courtroom sense. It is doing what plants do. It grows when fed. It drinks when watered. It follows sunlight without reading policy briefs. The questions belong to humans. How much land should be planted to one crop? How should soil be protected? How much fertilizer is enough? Who pays when water is damaged? How should farmers remain solvent while changing practices? These questions do not hum softly like bedtime thoughts. They click and knock like machinery that needs adjustment. Global trade widens the view. At a port, grain pours through chutes into the hold of a ship with a roar like dry surf. The smell is intense, dusty, warm, and slightly sweet. Seagulls wheel overhead. Workers in hard hats look small beside the scale of steel, conveyor belts, and storage towers. American corn moves into international markets, feeding animals and industries far from the fields where it grew. Prices respond to harvests in other countries, currency shifts, trade disputes, droughts, wars, fuel mandates, and shipping costs. A farmer's income may tremble because of weather across an ocean. You feel the strange fragility of abundance. Corn is astonishingly productive, but productivity depends on many supports: hybrid and genetically engineered seeds, fertilizers, herbicides, machinery, diesel, credit, insurance, storage, roads, rail, barges, policy, and weather all form the hidden scaffolding around the field. When everything works, corn seems inevitable. When drought hits, prices spike, rivers fall too low for barges, or fertilizer costs rise. Inevitability suddenly looks nervous. Genetically engineered corn enters this landscape as another layer of promise and doubt. Some varieties resist insects or tolerate certain herbicides, helping farmers manage pests and weeds. Supporters point to efficiency and yield protection. Critics worry about resistant weeds, corporate control of seed, ecological effects, and dependence on chemical systems. The field becomes a debate written in leaves. You walk the rows and hear only rustling, but the silence contains patents, lawsuits, lab work, farm budgets, and dinner-table opinions delivered with unnecessary confidence. Evening settles over the modern corn belt. The sun lowers into a haze of gold and lavender. Sprayers sit parked near sheds. Grain bins gleam like dull moons. A pivot irrigator ticks slowly in the distance, each pulse of water whispering against leaves. The air smells of dust, fertilizer, cut grass, and something faintly sweet rising from the field as heat leaves the day. You touch a corn leaf and feel its dry edge catch against your skin. This is abundance with a shadow. Corn has become sweetness, fuel, feed, export, ingredient, symbol, and problem. It has lifted yields, supported farmers, filled shelves, powered engines, and lowered the price of many foods. It has also drawn concern about health, soil, water, biodiversity, corporate power, and the hidden cost of cheap plenty. The crop remains beautiful in the field, green in summer, bronze in autumn, whispering at night as if it has nothing to do with all this argument. You stand between the rows as darkness thickens. Trucks pass beyond the ditch, their lights moving like slow fireflies. Somewhere, a pump shuts off. Somewhere, a train carries grain toward a river. The leaves stir around you with a papery sound, gentle and indifferent. Corn has given America more than it ever asked for, and now America is left asking what kind of abundance it truly wants. You stand at the edge of a cornfield near midnight, where the rows have lost their daytime certainty and become long walls of shadow. The moon hangs pale above the land, softened by a thin veil of cloud. The air is cool against your face. It carries the smell of dry leaves, soil, distant rain, and the faint sweetness that rises from mature stalks when the day's heat finally leaves them. Crickets pulse from the ditch. A night bird calls once, then goes quiet, as if even the wildlife has decided not to interrupt the field. You place one hand on a stalk. The leaf edge catches lightly against your skin, rough enough to remind you that corn is not a decoration. The husk is dry and fibrous. The stalk stands firm, jointed, and hollow-sounding when your knuckles tap it. It has the strange dignity of something ordinary that has carried more history than anyone expected. In the dark, a corn plant seems simple. Roots below, leaves above, an ear wrapped tight at the side. Yet inside that simple shape rests a long human arrangement of hunger, labour, belief, profit, science, argument, and memory. The mainstream historical fact here is that corn became one of the most important crops in the United States, shaping food systems, livestock production, rural economies, industrial manufacturing, and national identity. It helped build farms, towns, rail networks, kitchens, markets, and habits of abundance. The story of America cannot be told only through presidents, wars, inventions, or speeches. It must also be told through fields, granaries, mills, seed bags, feed bunks, lunch boxes, and the quiet scrape of a spoon in a bowl of cornmeal mush. You walk slowly between the rows. The leaves brush your shoulders with a dry whisper. The ground is uneven, ridged by tires and softened where rain has settled. Your shoes press into powdery soil, then into a damp patch that gives slightly under your weight. The field feels alive, but not awake in the human sense. It rustles, shifts, exhales. It holds the darkness the way a barn holds stored grain, patiently and without explanation. Corn has always been a crop of transformation. It turns sunlight into starch. It turns land into harvest. It turns harvest into bread, whiskey, meat, sweetness, fuel, paper, oil, and profit. It turns family labour into survival, and sometimes into debt. It turns local fields into global trade. It turns scientific research into taller plants and heavier wagons. It turns policy into landscape. It turns weather into joy or worry. That is a lot of work for a plant that cannot even move out of the rain. And still, corn is not only economics, It is sound. Think of dry ears being poured into a wooden crib, kernels knocking together like tiny beads. Think of a millstone grinding meal in a creekside building. Think of a knife scraping kernels from a cob into a summer pot. Think of wind moving across acres at dusk, each leaf adding its small voice until the whole field becomes a kind of breathing. You do not need a museum to hear history. Sometimes you only need to stand still beside a crop and let it rustle. Corn is also smell. Hot cornbread opened at the table, steam lifting from a golden crumb, wet silage fermenting in a bunker, sharp and sweet. Popcorn bursting in a pan, buttery and warm. Ethanol mash souring in a tank. Grain dust inside an elevator. Soil after rain in a field where seedlings have just broken through. These scents are humble, but they travel deep into memory. A person may forget a date from a textbook and still remember the smell of corn roasting over coals. You reach an opening where the field gives way to a farm lane. In the distance, grain bins shine faintly under the moon. Their metal sides reflect a dull silver glow. A combine rests near a shed, enormous and still, like some sleeping insect with very expensive habits. The machine's tyres are taller than your chest. Its surfaces hold dust from the last harvest. If you touch the ladder, the metal feels cool and slightly gritty. Machines changed corn, and corn rewarded machines by offering fields large enough to justify them. There is a scholarly uncertainty at the heart of corn's legacy. Historians continue to debate whether corn should be understood mainly as a democratic crop that helped ordinary people survive and settle, or as a crop repeatedly absorbed into systems of power, inequality, and industrial control. Both views hold truth. Corn fed poor families, supported indigenous civilizations, sustained frontier households, and offered reliable calories. Corn also fed plantations, land expansion, corporate supply chains, and ecological strain. It is not one moral symbol. It is a mirror with kernels. That may be why corn feels so American. It contains generosity and appetite, invention and exhaustion, abundance and waste, community and loneliness. It can be a bowl passed at a table, or a futures contract traded by someone who has not smelled a field in years. It can be a sacred plant in one setting, a ration in another, a snack at a movie, a sweetener in a bottle, a fuel in a tank, a feed ingredient in an animal's trough. Corn refuses to stay in one category. It is too useful. And useful things are always being recruited. A quirky tidbit waits in the shadows of American folklore. Corn mazes, now cheerful autumn attractions full of families getting mildly lost on purpose, are a very modern twist on an ancient crop. People spend centuries trying to make cornfields efficient, straight, measurable, and profitable. And then, naturally, someone decides the best use of a field is to carve it into a giant puzzle and sell cider nearby. Humanity is consistent only in its creativity and its desire for snacks. You pause and listen, somewhere beyond the fields. A highway hums softly. The sound is low and steady, like a faraway river. Trucks may be carrying grain, meat, fuel, groceries, seed, or fertilizer. The road and the field are connected, though the connection is not visible in the dark. Modern life is full of hidden lines. A soda fountain is tied to a processing plant. A steak is tied to a feed ration. A grocery shelf is tied to a harvest forecast. A farmer's planting decision is tied to a policy meeting, a weather model, a seed contract, a river level, and a bank loan. Yet the plant itself remains rooted in immediate things: soil temperature, moisture, sunlight, pollination, wind, the fragile timing of silks and pollen, the risk of hail, the hunger of insects, the pressure of weeds, the patience of roots spreading through earth. Stand in the field long enough, and the grand systems quiet down. You remember that agriculture begins with living processes that cannot be fully commanded. They can be guided, intensified, ensured, mechanized, and analysed, but never completely controlled. The field always keeps a little authority for itself. You imagine the hands that have held corn across thousands of years. Hands selecting seed, hands grinding meal, hands planting hills, hands tying husks, hands feeding animals, hands tallying accounts, hands lifting ration bowls, hands adjusting a planter, hands testing grain moisture, hands opening a lunchbox, hands passing popcorn in the dark. Not one story, but millions of small gestures repeated until they form a civilization. Corn built America not as a single heroic act, but through repetition, a seed placed in soil, a field weeded, an ear dried, a wagon loaded, a mill turned, a pig fattened, a barrel filled, a train sent east, a factory supplied, a supermarket stocked, a dinner served. The scale becomes enormous only because the gestures are small enough to repeat. You turn back toward the rows. Moonlight catches the tassels and gives them a grey, feathery look. The plants no longer seem like soldiers in formation. They seem like witnesses. They have watched ambition come and go, watched tools change shape, watched families rise and vanish, watched towns appear, watched rivers carry soil, watched children grow tall enough to disappear between rows. Cornfields are often described as silent, but that is not quite right. They speak softly, in a language of friction, leaf, husk, and wind. The crop's future remains unsettled. Farmers experiment with cover crops, precision tools, soil conservation, new rotations, drought tolerance, and ways to reduce runoff while staying solvent. Consumers ask more questions about food, fuel, health, climate, and land. Scientists keep studying genetics, carbon, water, insects, and resilience. Corn will not leave the American story. It is far too deeply planted. The question is how it will be grown, used, valued, and limited. A cooler breeze passes through the field. The leaves answer with a low, papery murmur. You breathe in slowly. The smell of earth is darker now, almost mineral. The distant bins, the resting combine, the lane, the ditch, the unseen highway, the farmhouse light. All of it gathers into one quiet scene. Corn is not merely the crop that built America. It is one of the crops that taught America how to become large, how to feed itself, how to sell abundance, how to hide costs, and how to keep asking whether enough can ever truly be enough. Now the field softens around you. The rows blur into shadow, and the moonlight turns each husk pale at the edges. You let your hand fall from the stalk. The night air rests gently on your skin. Nothing needs to be solved in this moment. The machines are still. The bins are quiet. The road has faded to a low hush. Above you, the sky opens wide and calm, scattered with small patient stars. The corn moves only when the wind asks it to, and even then it answers slowly, leaf by leaf, like a whisper passing from one sleeper to another. You breathe with the field, easy and unhurried. The earth holds its warmth below. The darkness gathers kindly, and the long green story settles at last into silence.